Stand 30 seconds against me. I'll call you master. That's what my father said, Bruce told the young man. Those exact words. My father heard it from a guy named Ray, a guy who trained at Bruce's school in Los Angeles in early '73. Ray told it once, at a dinner in Seattle, maybe 1986 or '87. My father was there. He told it to me years later. Now let me be clear about something before I go any further. I never met Ray. I never met the young American. My father got this third hand through a man at a dinner table who had been there, in that dojo, on that day. My father believed him. The way Ray told it never changed, not a single detail, and my father said that's how you know a man is telling the truth. When a liar tells a story 3 times, it gets better each time. When an honest man tells it, it stays the same. It stays ordinary. It stays small in the places where a liar would make it big. So that's what I have. A third-hand story told once at a dinner table in Seattle by a man my father trusted. Take it accordingly. But my father told it to me 4 times over the years. And it never changed either. The floor. That's where it starts. Not with the young American. Not with Bruce. With the floor. Ray said the first thing you noticed when you walked into that dojo was the floor. It was hardwood, old hardwood, not the kind they put in new buildings. This was wood that had been walked on for decades. Polished by feet. Darkened in the places where people stood the most. You could see the grain of it from across the room, and if you got down close you could smell it, linseed oil and sweat and something older than both. Bruce cared about that floor. Ray said he'd seen Bruce stop a class to pick up a grain of sand that somebody had tracked in on their foot. He didn't yell about it. He didn't make a speech. He just stopped, walked over, knelt down, picked up the grain between his thumb and forefinger, looked at it, and carried it to the door. Then he came back and continued the drill as if nothing had happened. But everyone noticed. You noticed because he didn't say anything. If he had said something, clean your feet, be more careful, this floor matters, you would have forgotten it by the next day. But he said nothing. He just picked up the grain of sand. And after that, every man in that room checked his feet before stepping on the wood. Ray said the floor was the first lesson. Before anyone taught you a stance, before anyone corrected your hand position, before anyone even spoke to you, the floor taught you. It taught you that this was a place where small things were not small. Where a grain of sand was not a grain of sand. Where the surface you stood on was not separate from the thing you were trying to learn. My father liked that detail. He told it to me every time. The floor. He said it reminded him of something his own teacher had told him once, back in Hong Kong, that you can tell everything about a school by looking at the ground. If the ground is clean, the teaching is clean. If the ground is cracked and no one has fixed it, the teaching has cracks too. I don't know if that's true. But I know that Ray started the story with the floor, and my father started the story with the floor, and now I'm starting it with the floor. Because that's where it happened. On that wood. And the wood remembered it even if nobody else wrote it down. The dojo was on a side street in Los Angeles. I'm not going to say exactly where because Ray never said exactly where, and my father never pressed him on it. It was a ground floor space in a building that had been something else before, a dance studio, maybe, or a small warehouse. The ceilings were high. The windows were high, 2 narrow rectangles near the top of the wall that let in daylight but didn't let you see the street. Ray said it felt like being inside a box that someone had cut slits into. The light came in at an angle in the afternoon and made long bright stripes across the floor. Dust floated in those stripes. You could see every particle. There was a wooden rack on the far wall with weapons, wooden swords, staffs, a pair of nunchaku. Things like that. There was no mirror. Ray mentioned that specifically. He said most martial arts schools had a mirror on at least one wall so students could watch their form. Bruce didn't want a mirror. Ray didn't know why. He had his own theory. He said Bruce didn't want his students watching themselves because watching yourself means you're thinking about how you look, and thinking about how you look means you're not thinking about what you're doing. But that was Ray's theory, not Bruce's. Bruce never explained it. The wall where the mirror would have been was just bare plaster, painted white, with a single crack running from about chest height down to the baseboard. Ray said the crack had been there the whole time he trained there. Nobody ever fixed it. He didn't know what to make of that. The room could hold maybe 15, 18 people comfortably. On any given day there were between 6 and 12. They trained barefoot. They wore whatever they wanted. Some wore GIs, some wore sweatpants and t-shirts. One guy trained in cutoff jeans. Bruce didn't care what you wore. He cared what you did. Ray had been training there for about 4 months when the young American walked in. That would put it in January of 1973, give or take a week or two. Ray wasn't sure of the exact date. He said it was a Tuesday, but he wasn't sure about that either. What he was sure about was that it was afternoon, late afternoon, because the light from those high windows was coming in at a steep angle, which meant the sun was getting low. He was sure about the light because of what it did to the floor. Los Angeles, January 1973. Bruce Lee was 32 years old. He had just come back from Hong Kong, where he had been filming. Ray didn't know what he'd been filming. He just knew Bruce had been gone for a while and had come back looking thinner than before, not unhealthy thin, but stripped down, like a man who had been working 16-hour days and eating when he remembered to. His cheekbones were sharper. His forearms looked like cables. Ray said he moved differently, too faster in some ways, more deliberate in others. Like a man who had been practicing something specific and hadn't quite decided whether to show it yet. On this particular afternoon, Bruce was teaching a small class. Ray said there were maybe 8 or 9 students on the floor. They were working on a trapping drill, close-range work, hands and forearms, the kind of thing where you're standing so close to your partner that you can feel their breath on your face. Bruce was moving between pairs, watching, correcting. He didn't correct with words very often. He'd walk up behind you, put his hand on your elbow, move it 2 inches to the left, and walk away. If you were smart, you remembered those 2 inches for the rest of your life. If you weren't smart, he'd move your elbow again next time. Ray said Bruce never corrected the same thing more than 3 times. If you didn't get it after 3 times, he stopped correcting you. He didn't kick you out. He didn't say anything. He just stopped paying attention to that particular mistake. And you felt it, the absence of his attention. Ray said it was worse than being yelled at. That's what was happening when the door opened. The dojo had a wooden door, heavy, dark wood, with a brass handle that Ray said was always slightly tarnished. It didn't have a bell or a buzzer. It didn't need one. The hinges were dry and they made a sound when the door moved, not a creak exactly, more like a groan, like the door was complaining about being asked to do its job. Ray said you always knew when someone was coming in because of that sound. And you always looked. Everyone looked. It was reflexive. So the door groaned. And everyone looked. The man standing in the doorway was tall. Ray said that was the first thing, the height. He filled the frame of the door not because he was wide but because he was long. Maybe 6'4", maybe a little more. He had dark hair, cut short but not military short. He was young, early 20s, maybe 21, maybe 22. He had a face that Ray described as still being assembled. Not ugly. Not handsome yet. A face that hadn't decided what it was going to be. But the jaw was set. The jaw was already finished. He was wearing a black GI, a full black aikido GI with a hakama, the wide split skirt that aikido practitioners wear. It was clean. It was pressed. It looked expensive. Ray said the detail stuck with him because nobody in that dojo wore anything that looked expensive. Most of them wore clothes that they also slept in. This man looked like he had dressed for a photograph. He was carrying a bag, a long canvas bag, the kind you'd put a wooden sword in. He set it down just inside the door, against the wall, carefully, the way you set down something that matters to you. Then he stood there. He didn't bow. Ray noticed that. In most martial arts schools, you bow when you enter. It's not a rule anyone has to explain. You just do it. The floor is a different space from the street, and you acknowledge the difference. This man didn't. He just stood in the doorway and looked around the room like he was checking inventory. Bruce didn't look up. Ray said that was the thing he remembered most clearly about the first 60 seconds. Bruce didn't look up. He was standing behind two students who were working the trapping drill, and he had his hand on one student's shoulder, adjusting something. The door groaned, everyone turned, and Bruce kept his hand on the student's shoulder and kept looking at the student's elbow. He didn't flinch. He didn't glance. He didn't acknowledge the door at all. The young American stood there for a moment. Then, and Ray said this was the part that made his stomach tighten, the young man walked to the far wall, across the floor, in his shoes. He was wearing black shoes, not street shoes, some kind of light martial arts slipper, but still shoes. On the floor. On that floor. And he walked across it without taking them off, without even hesitating, and sat down against the far wall, cross-legged, with his arms folded across his chest. Nobody said anything. Ray looked at Bruce. Bruce still had his hand on the student's shoulder. He was still looking at the student's elbow. But the hand wasn't moving anymore. It was just resting there. And the student had gone stiff under it, because the student could feel that the hand had changed. It was the same hand, in the same place, but the weight of it was different. It was the weight of a man who was paying attention to something else. But Bruce didn't look up. Not for 11 minutes. That's what Ray said. 11 minutes. He was certain about the number because he checked his watch. He checked it when the young man sat down, and he checked it again when Bruce finally acknowledged him. 11 minutes. During those 11 minutes, Bruce continued teaching. He finished correcting the student's elbow. He moved to another pair. He demonstrated a technique, a short, fast entry that ended with a palm strike to a leather pad one of the students was holding. The pad made a sound like a rifle shot. Ray said he flinched every time, even after 4 months. Bruce demonstrated it twice, then had the students try it. He walked between them, watching. The young American sat against the wall the entire time. Cross-legged. Arms folded. Watching. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't uncross his arms. He didn't look around the room. He looked at Bruce. Only at Bruce. Ray said it wasn't hostile exactly, it wasn't a stare, it wasn't a challenge. It was something else. It was the way a man watches another man when he's measuring him. Not judging. Measuring. Figuring out the dimensions. The reach. The speed. Where the weight sits. How the hips move. Ray said it made him uncomfortable, not because it was aggressive but because it was so focused. The young man was studying Bruce the way Bruce studied his students. With that same total attention. And Bruce knew it. Ray was certain of that. Bruce knew the man was sitting there watching him because Bruce knew everything that happened on that floor. He knew when a student in the back row shifted from his left foot to his right. He knew when someone's breathing changed. He knew when someone was about to ask a question before they opened their mouth. There was no chance at all, that he didn't know about the man in the black GI sitting against the wall with his arms folded. But he didn't look. Ray said the other students were distracted. Nobody was doing the drill correctly anymore. Everyone was splitting their attention between the pad and the stranger. Bruce didn't say anything about it. He just let the quality of the training drop for 11 minutes. Ray said he'd never seen Bruce do that before. Bruce was precise about training time. He didn't waste it. He didn't let other people waste it. But for 11 minutes he let the entire room fall apart while a man in black sat against the wall and watched. Then he stopped. He stopped in the middle of a correction. His hand was on a student's forearm, and he just stopped. He let go of the forearm. He stood up straight. He turned his head, not his body, just his head, and looked at the young American. And then he looked at the floor. He looked at the line the young man had walked in his shoes. You couldn't see it, there was no dirt, no scuff mark, nothing visible. But Bruce looked at it anyway. He looked at the path from the door to the wall as if he could see the footprints. And Ray said something changed in his face. Not anger. Not irritation. Something quieter than that. Something like a decision being made very far behind the eyes. Bruce looked at the young man and said one word. Shoes. The young American looked down at his feet. Then he looked back up at Bruce. He didn't move. He didn't uncross his arms. He held Bruce's gaze for what Ray said was about 3 seconds, which doesn't sound like a long time until you're in a room where nobody is breathing and the man you're looking at is Bruce Lee. Then he uncrossed his arms. He reached down, pulled off his shoes, those black slippers, and placed them neatly beside him against the wall. Side by side. Lined up. Like he was making a point that he could be precise too. Bruce watched him do it. He didn't nod. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything. He just watched the shoes come off and get placed against the wall, and then he turned back to the class and said, again. The students went back to the drill. But quality came back up immediately. Like a switch had been thrown. Ray said it was as if those 11 minutes of slack had never happened, as if Bruce had allowed the room to lose its shape specifically so that when he brought it back, the snap would be sharper. Ray didn't know if that was intentional. He didn't know if Bruce had planned it that way. But the effect was real. Everyone in that room was more focused after the shoes came off than they had been all day. The young American sat against the wall for another 20 minutes. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He watched. Then Bruce ended the class. He ended it the way he always ended it, a brief standing meditation, maybe 30 seconds, everyone still, and then a nod, and then it was over. Students bowed, started gathering their things, talking quietly. The energy in the room loosened. People became people again instead of students. Bruce walked to the corner where he kept a thermos of tea. He poured himself a cup. He drank it standing up, looking at nothing in particular. He looked tired, not exhausted, not dramatic, just the ordinary tiredness of a man who had been teaching for 2 hours and had a lot on his mind. Then he walked over to the young American. He walked slowly. Not cautiously, there was nothing cautious about it. He walked the way a man walks when he's in his own house and there's no reason to hurry. The dojo was his house. Every step was familiar. He walked across the floor he had cleaned that morning and would clean again that night, and he stopped about 4 feet from the young man and stood there with the tea in his hand. The young American stood up. He unfolded himself from the floor in one smooth motion, and Ray said it was smooth, genuinely smooth, the kind of getting up that tells you a man has spent a lot of time on the ground and knows how to use it. He rose without using his hands, without leaning, without any of the small adjustments most people make. He just went from sitting to standing like water changing direction. He was taller than Bruce by a good margin. Maybe 7 inches, maybe 8. Ray said that standing next to each other the difference was almost comical. Bruce compact and dense and still, the young American long and angular and vibrating with something Ray could only describe as ambition. Not nervous energy. Ambition. The physical expression of a man who wanted something so badly that his body couldn't quite contain it. They stood there for a moment. Then the young American spoke. Ray said his voice was deeper than you'd expect from a 22-year-old. Not artificially deep, not put on, but deep in the way that some men's voices settle early, like a foundation being poured. He spoke clearly and without hesitation, and what he said was this. I study aikido. I've trained in Japan. I hold a black belt and I intend to hold more. I've heard what people say about you and I want to see if it's true. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I want to know. Ray remembered every word because it was rehearsed. Not in a bad way, in the way that a man rehearses something because he knows he'll only get one chance to say it and he wants it to come out right. The young man had practiced those sentences. He had stood in front of a mirror somewhere and said them until they sounded natural. And they almost did. Almost. But there was a scene where the rehearsal met the reality, and Ray could hear it, and Bruce could hear it. Bruce drank his tea. He drank it slowly. He took a sip, held it, swallowed, and took another sip. The young American stood there waiting. He was patient. Ray gave him that. He didn't fidget. He didn't fill the silence. He stood there and let Bruce drink his tea, and he waited. Then Bruce said something that Ray said he has turned over in his mind every year since. What do you want to know? That's all. 4 words. But Ray said the way Bruce said them mattered more than the words themselves. He said them quietly, without emphasis, without challenge, without any of the things you'd expect from a man who's just been told that someone wants to test him. He said them the way you'd ask a stranger for directions. Flat. Simple. What do you want to know? And the young American, and this is where Ray said the temperature in the room changed, the young American smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a cold smile. A smile that was trying to be both and landed somewhere in between. And he said, I want to know how fast you are. Bruce finished his tea. He set the cup down on the floor, not on a table, not on a shelf, on the floor, carefully, the way he'd picked up the grain of sand. Cup on the wood. Then he straightened up and looked at the young man. How fast I am. Yes. Why? Because I've heard things I don't believe. Bruce was quiet for a moment. Ray said you could hear the building, the hum of pipes somewhere in the walls, a car passing on the street outside, the ticking of the building cooling down in the late afternoon. Those sounds had been there the whole time, but you could only hear them now because the room had gotten so quiet. Then Bruce said, and this is the part my father told me 4 times, and it never changed, Bruce said. Take off your hakama. Step on the floor. Stand 30 seconds against me. If you're standing after 30 seconds, I'll call you master and you can teach in this room any day you like. Ray said the young man's smile disappeared. Not slowly, all at once, like a light being turned off. The smile was there, and then it wasn't, and what was underneath it wasn't fear exactly but recognition. The recognition that something had shifted. That the conversation he had rehearsed was over and something he hadn't rehearsed was beginning. The young American looked at Bruce for a long moment. Then he said, and Ray was very specific about this, very specific about the exact words he said. 30 seconds is a long time. And Bruce said, yes, it is. Ray said the class had mostly cleared out by this point. A few students were still in the room, maybe 4 or 5, gathering their bags, putting on their shoes by the door. They had stopped what they were doing. They were watching. Nobody was pretending not to watch. The pretense had ended when Bruce said the word master. The young American reached behind his back and untied the strings of his hakama. He let it fall to the floor. Underneath he was wearing a black GI bottom, fitted, and you could see his legs for the first time. Ray said his legs were long, obviously long, the legs of a tall man, but they were also trained. The calves were defined. The knees tracked properly. He had spent time on those legs. He had done work. He folded the hakama. He folded it carefully, precisely, the way a man folds something that was given to him by a teacher he respects. It took him about 20 seconds to fold it. He placed it on top of his bag against the wall. Then he turned back to Bruce and stepped onto the center of the floor. Barefoot now. On that wood. Bruce hadn't moved. He was still standing where he'd been, about 4 feet from where the young man had been sitting. He hadn't taken a stance. He hadn't stretched. He hadn't done any of the things a man normally does before a physical exchange. He was just standing there in his gray t-shirt and dark trousers, barefoot, hands at his sides, weight evenly distributed, looking at the young American the way you look at a sentence you're about to read aloud. The young man settled into a stance. Ray said it was a proper stance, aikido stance, hanmi, feet at about 45 degrees, weight centered, hands open in front of him. It was correct. It was textbook. It looked like a photograph in a manual. And that, Ray said, was the problem. It looked like a photograph. It looked like something a man does when he wants you to see that he knows what he's doing. Not something a man does when he's about to be in danger. Bruce looked at the stance. He didn't comment on it. He didn't adjust it. He just looked at it the way he had looked at the line of shoe prints on the floor, reading something that wasn't visible to anyone else. Then Bruce took one step forward. Not a fast step. Not a fighting step. A walking step. The kind of step you take when you're crossing a room to answer the telephone. One step. Maybe 18 inches. And the young American moved. He moved backward. Not a lot, maybe 6 inches. A small adjustment, a repositioning, the kind of thing a trained martial artist does reflexively when distance changes. It was correct. It was appropriate. It was what his training had taught him to do. But he moved. Ray said Bruce looked at that movement, that 6-inch retreat, the way a doctor looks at an X-ray. Not with satisfaction. Not with contempt. With information. He filed it. He processed it. And then something in his posture changed. Not something you could see with your eyes. Something you could feel with your skin. Ray said the room got heavier. Like the barometric pressure had dropped. Like a storm was coming in from somewhere you couldn't see. Bruce said, "We haven't started yet." The young man said nothing. Bruce said, "When I say go, the 30 seconds begins. Not before. Do you understand?" The young man nodded. Bruce said, "I'm going to move. You're going to try to stay standing. That's all. No strikes. No locks. I'm just going to move, and you're going to try to keep your feet. 30 seconds. Do you understand? The young man nodded again. Go. Ray said what happened next took 4 seconds. He was sure about that number. Not because he timed it, he didn't. He was sure because he replayed it so many times in his memory that he counted the beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it was over. What he saw, and he was honest that he didn't see all of it, nobody could have seen all of it at normal speed, was this. Bruce didn't step forward. He was already forward. That was the only way Ray could describe it. There was no transition between standing still and being inside the young man's guard. There was Bruce at 4 feet, and then there was Bruce at 0, and the space between those two things was not a movement but an absence. The 4 feet of distance didn't shrink. They ceased to exist. The young man's hands came up. They came up correctly, aikido response. Open hands, trying to redirect whatever was coming. His training fired exactly the way it was supposed to fire. His hands went where his thousands of hours of practice told them to go. They went to the wrong place. Bruce wasn't where the hands went. Bruce was underneath them. Bruce was to the left and then to the right and then somewhere behind the young man's center of gravity, and by the time the young man's hands found the space where Bruce should have been, Bruce was already occupying the space where the young man was about to fall. That's how Ray described it. Bruce occupied the space where the young man was about to fall. As if he could see the future of the body, as if he knew, before the young man's balance broke, exactly where the breaking would send him, and he was already there, waiting, the way a net is waiting under a trapeze. The young man's feet left the floor. Not dramatically, there was no throw, no sweep, no technique that Ray could name or identify. The young man's feet simply stopped being connected to the wood. One moment he was standing in his perfect textbook hanmi, and the next moment he was horizontal, moving through the air at about waist height, and the moment after that he was on the floor. On his back. On that wood. Looking up at the ceiling. 4 seconds. Ray said the sound was the worst part. Not the impact was controlled. Bruce had done something with his hand, or maybe his forearm, at the moment of landing that took most of the force out of it. The young man hit the floor hard enough to know he'd been put there but not hard enough to be hurt. That was precise. That was deliberate. That was Bruce saying, I can put you on this floor and I can choose how much it hurts. The sound was the young man's breath leaving his body. A short, sharp exhalation, not a grunt, not a gasp, more like the sound a bellows makes when you step on it. The sound of air being forced out of a container. And then silence. The young man on the floor, not breathing for a moment, and the room not breathing either, and the dust in the light from those high windows still floating because dust doesn't care what happens below it. Then the young man breathed in. A long, ragged inhale. The kind of breath you take when your body has forgotten how to do it on its own and has to remember from the beginning. He didn't sit up. He didn't roll over. He just lay there on his back on the wood and breathed. Bruce was standing about 3 feet away. He had stepped back. Ray hadn't seen him step back the same way he hadn't seen him step forward, but Bruce was now at a respectful distance, hands at his sides, watching the young man on the floor the way you watch a kettle to see if it's going to whistle. The young man turned his head and looked at Bruce. Ray said the look was the thing that haunted him for years afterward. It wasn't a look of anger. It wasn't a look of shame. It wasn't even a look of defeat. It was a look of recognition. The young American was looking at Bruce the way a man looks at a mountain he has just realized he was about to try to climb in the wrong shoes. With understanding. With a strange kind of relief. As if he was grateful, in some small private way, that the question had been answered before he had spent the rest of his life asking it. He said something. From the floor. Quietly. Ray didn't catch all of it. He was too far away and the young man's voice was too soft. But he caught the last word. The last word was clear because the young man said it twice. Master. Master. He said it twice. The first time it was almost a question. The second time it was a statement. He was lying on his back on the wood, looking up at a man 7 inches shorter than him, and he said the word twice, once as a question, once as an answer. Bruce looked at him for a moment. Then Bruce knelt down. Not in front of him, beside him. He knelt beside the young man's head and put his hand flat on the wood, very lightly. He didn't touch the young man. He just put his hand on the floor near the young man's head, palm down, fingers spread. And he said, "Get up." The young man got up. Slowly. Carefully. He sat first. Then crouched, then stood. He looked unsteady on his feet, but he refused to lean on anything. Ray respected that. Bruce had not extended a hand to help him, and the young man had not asked for one. He stood up under his own power because he had been put on the floor under someone else's, and the symmetry mattered to him. Bruce stood up too. They were facing each other again, the same way they had been facing each other before. Except now everything was different. Bruce said, "You stayed up 4 seconds." The young man said, "I know." Bruce said, 4 seconds is not nothing." The young man said, "It's not 30. Bruce said, "No. It's not." They stood there for another moment. Ray said the room had completely emptied except for him and one other student. Everyone else had stopped pretending to gather their things and had left, because they understood that what was happening was not for them to watch. Ray stayed because he was Ray, and because something in him knew that he was going to need to remember this. The other student stayed because he was tying his shoes very slowly. Bruce said, "I want to tell you something." The young man waited. Bruce said, "There is a word in our language. The word is sifu. In English you would translate it as master, but the translation is wrong. Master is not the right word. Sifu means teacher father. It means a man who has the right to correct your life. Not because he is better than you. Because he has agreed to be responsible for what you become. Do you understand?" The young man nodded. Bruce said, "I will not let you call me master. Not because you didn't last 30 seconds. Because the word is wrong. You don't need a master. You need a teacher. And you already have teachers. You said you trained in Japan. Those men are your teachers. Go back to them. Tell them what happened here. Don't tell them I beat you. Tell them you walked into a room without bowing, sat against the wall in your shoes, and asked a question you weren't ready for. Tell them that. And then ask them to help you become ready." The young man's face changed. Ray said it was the first time in the entire encounter that he looked young, actually young, not the rehearsed young of a man who has decided what kind of man he is going to be, but young in the way a son looks at a father. Surprised. A little ashamed. A little grateful. The young man said, "Why are you telling me this?" Bruce said, "Because you are going to be famous." Ray said the silence after that sentence was the longest silence of the whole afternoon. The young American stared at Bruce. Bruce looked back at him steadily, no smile, no challenge, just the ordinary look of a man telling another man the truth. The young man said, "How do you know?" Bruce said, "I don't know how I know. I know." The young man said, "Famous for what?" Bruce said, "That doesn't matter. What matters is that when you are famous, people will tell stories about you. Some of those stories will be true. Some of them will be lies. You will not be able to control which is which. The only thing you will be able to control is what you do when no one is watching. You will be tempted to tell the story of today differently than it happened. Don't tell it the way it happened. If you tell it the way it happened, the lies people tell about you later will not be able to touch you. If you tell it the way you wish it had happened, the truth will follow you the rest of your life. The young man stood there for a long moment. Then he bowed. Ray said it was a real bow. Not the textbook bow he should have done at the door. A deeper bow. The bow of a man bowing because he meant it, not because the form required it. He bowed from the waist, slowly, and held it for maybe 3 seconds, and then straightened up and looked at Bruce one more time. He said, "Thank you, Sifu." Bruce said, "You're welcome." The young man walked to the wall. He picked up his hakama. He didn't put it back on. He just folded it again and put it under his arm. He picked up his bag with the wooden sword in it. He picked up his shoes and held them in one hand. He walked to the door barefoot, opened it, and stepped through. The door groaned. He closed it behind him. Bruce stood on the floor for a moment. Then he walked to the corner, picked up his teacup, and drained the last of it. Ray said he never asked Bruce about the encounter. Not that day. Not any day after. He didn't feel he had the right. The thing had happened in front of him, and he had been allowed to see it, and that was enough. He didn't need an explanation. He didn't need confirmation. He had seen what he had seen, and the man on the floor had said the word twice. Master. Master. My father told me this story for the first time when I was 12. He told it to me because I had come home from school complaining about a kid who was bigger than me. The kid had pushed me into a locker. I told my father about it at dinner, and my father listened, and he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he told me the story of the young American in the dojo. He didn't tell it to teach me how to fight. He told it to teach me how to lose. Because the lesson in that dojo, my father said, wasn't about Bruce being faster than the young man. Anyone could be faster than anyone else on a given day. The lesson was about what Bruce did after he put the young man on the floor. He told him he was going to be famous. He told him to tell the truth. My father said that was the part of the story that mattered. Not the 4 seconds. Not the throw. Not the fact that a future action star was put on his back by a man 7 inches shorter than him. Those were the parts that made the story fun to tell. But the part that made the story worth telling, the part that made my father remember it for 40 years, was that Bruce, after winning, gave the young man something more valuable than the win. He gave him a warning about his own future. He told him how to survive his own success. That, my father said, is what a teacher does. A teacher doesn't beat you. A teacher beats you and then tells you how not to be beaten by yourself. The young American went on to become exactly what Bruce predicted. Famous. An action star. People told stories about him, some true, some lies. He had a long career and a controversial one, and you can read about it anywhere. I'm not going to repeat any of those stories here because they are not the story I'm telling. The story I'm telling is what happened on a wood floor in Los Angeles in January of 1973, between 2 men who would never meet again. I don't know if the young American kept his word. I don't know if he told the story the way it happened. I have my own opinions, but I'm not going to share them, because that would be exactly the kind of thing Bruce told him not to do, adding my version on top of his version, replacing his memory with mine. If he told the story the way it happened, then I hope he found peace in it. If he didn't, then the story belongs to Ray, and to my father, and to whoever else was tying their shoes very slowly that afternoon. It belongs to the wood, mostly. The wood that Bruce kept clean. The wood that the young American walked across in his shoes and then walked across again in bare feet. The wood that received him when he fell and gave him back when he stood. That floor is gone now. The dojo closed years ago. The building was sold and renovated and is something else now. Ray went back once in the early 90s and said the floor had been pulled up and replaced with carpet. Synthetic carpet, the cheap kind. He stood on it for a minute and then left and never went back. But the wood was there once. And two men stood on it. And one of them put the other one down in 4 seconds, and then knelt beside his head and told him the truth about his life. That's the story. That's the whole thing. In the spring of 2019, my father met a man in a parking lot outside a grocery store in Burbank. The man was in his late 60s, tall, walking with a slight limp. My father didn't recognize him at first. The man was loading groceries into the trunk of a black SUV. My father walked past him and then stopped, because something in the way the man stood, the way he balanced his weight on his back foot when he reached forward, was familiar in a way my father couldn't immediately place. My father turned around. He looked at the man for a moment longer. Then the man looked up. They made eye contact across maybe 10 feet of parking lot. My father said the man's eyes changed. Just slightly. A flicker of something, not recognition exactly, because they had never met, but awareness. The awareness of being seen by someone who knew something about him that strangers don't usually know. My father didn't say anything. He didn't approach. He didn't ask for a photograph or an autograph or any of the things people ask for. He just looked at the man for one more second, and then nodded once, very slightly, and continued walking to his car. The man nodded back. That was all. My father told me about the parking lot encounter the last time he told me the dojo story, which was about 6 months before he died. He said he wasn't sure if the man in the parking lot was the same young American from Ray's story. He said he had no way to be certain. The features had aged, the body had thickened, and 46 years had passed. He could have been wrong. He probably was wrong. Most of the time when you think you've seen someone famous in a parking lot, you haven't. But the way the man balanced his weight, my father said. The way he balanced his weight on his back foot when he reached for the groceries. That was the same. That was the stance. The textbook Hanmi from the dojo floor. 46 years later, in a parking lot in Burbank, an old man loading bananas into a black SUV, still standing the way they had taught him to stand in Japan. My father said he liked to think the man had told the story the way it happened. He said he had no evidence either way. He just liked to think it. And on the drive home that afternoon, he said, he caught himself smiling, not because he had seen someone famous, but because he had seen, maybe, the proof of a promise kept. A small nod across a parking lot. The acknowledgement of a debt that had been quietly paid for 46 years and would be paid for the rest of one man's life. Or maybe it was a stranger. My father said that too. Maybe it was just a tall old man with a limp and a familiar way of standing, and my father had imagined the rest. He said he was old enough to know that you imagine things. You imagine that the world is connected when it isn't. You imagine that strangers are the people you've been thinking about. You imagine that a nod means something more than a nod. But sometimes, he said, the world is connected. Sometimes a stranger is the person you've been thinking about. Sometimes a nod means everything. He said you don't get to know which times are which. You just get to keep walking to your car. I think about that story when I'm standing in places where wood used to be. There are a lot of those places now. Old buildings get renovated. Old floors get covered. The places where things happen get replaced with the places where things are happening now, and the only people who remember the wood are the people who walked on it. Bruce died about 6 months after that afternoon in the dojo. July of 1973. He was 32 years old. The young American he had put on the floor in January was 22 when it happened, which means he is alive somewhere as I'm telling you this. He has had a longer life than his teacher had. He has had time to do things, to become things, to make choices, to have those choices judged. Bruce has not. Bruce had 4 seconds with him in 1973 and then a parking lot nod, maybe, in 2019, through someone else's eyes. That's all. But that's enough. That's how teaching works, when it works. A teacher gives you something in 4 seconds that you carry for 46 years. You don't always carry it well. You don't always carry it the way the teacher intended. But you carry it. The weight of it stays with you. The shape of it presses into your body the way a footprint presses into wet sand. And on a quiet afternoon, decades later, when you reach forward to load groceries into a car, your back foot remembers, without you telling it, exactly where to be. That's the floor, in the end. That's what Bruce was teaching when he picked up the grain of sand. That's what he was teaching when he made the young American take off his shoes. That's what he was teaching when he knelt beside his head and said, "Get up." He was teaching the floor. He was teaching that the surface you stand on is not separate from the thing you are trying to learn. He was teaching that small things are not small. That a grain of sand is not a grain of sand. That 4 seconds is not 4 seconds. That a master is not a master. A master is a teacher who has agreed to be responsible for what you become. My father said that's the only definition of the word that ever made sense to him. Every other definition was a kind of lie. Bruce knew it. The young American eventually knew it too, my father said, or at least he hoped so. Ray knew it the moment he saw the young man on the floor say the word twice, once as a question, once as an answer. Master. Master. I don't know if it's true. I told you I don't. I told you my father got this third hand, from Ray, at a dinner table in Seattle in the 1980s. I have no documentation. I have no photograph. I have no other witness. What I have is a story that did not change in 4 tellings over 30 years, and the memory of an old man, my father, who told it to me one more time, 6 months before he died, and ended it by saying that he wasn't sure if the man in the parking lot was the same man. But the way he balanced his weight, my father said. That was the same. That's the floor. That's the whole story. That's the wood under everything. If you've watched this far, thank you for sitting cross-legged against the wall for as long as you did. I don't ask you to believe any of it. I ask you to tell it the way it was told to you, if you tell it at all. And if you do, leave the parts that are small as they were. Don't make the 4 seconds into 10. Don't make the throw into a beating. Don't make the warning in the parking lot into a confrontation. Tell it the way it happened, or the way it was told to me as having happened, and let the wood do the rest. The wood remembers. Even when it's been pulled up and replaced with carpet, somewhere in the building's bones it remembers. A dojo in Los Angeles. January 1973. A young American who didn't bow. A teacher who didn't look up for 11 minutes. 4 seconds on the floor. A word said twice. Get up.